Many of you may have noticed that we sent out a survey before this session, and we got a lot of feedback, and there are a lot of varying skill levels in here. So what we're actually going to do is start with the basics, what I consider the essential things and what Nick considers the essential things to actually have a strong foundation to utilize After Effects to its highest possible level. So we're going to start with some of the basic fundamental things, but then we're going to ramp up quickly into some more intermediate and advanced things, some third-party scripts, some fun kind of things as we continue moving. So just in case you don't know where you are, we're at After Effects Power Tips to become a power user. And I am Ian Robinson.
I'm Nick.
Nick Harauz, to be exact.
Nick Harauz, yes.
Just so you know who you are, all right?
You don't have to do the formalities, I'm just Nick, it's good.
All right, and so we're going to cover a couple different topics inside this session. So we'll cover some more than this, but these are the essentials. We're gonna talk about different ways to view the After Effects interface. We'll talk about project organization, fundamentals and tips, both managing projects inside After Effects and outside of After Effects, and you'll know what that means here in a little bit. We'll get into some color correction tips and new features. We'll talk about sequencing layers for creating some flexible reveals. We'll create some shape layer tricks for faster design and adjustments within shape layers. Those of you that have been in shape layers know there are a lot of things to drill down through, but there are some ways to actually get through there pretty quickly. We'll talk about some green screen presets and setups for precise keying. We'll get into some camera scripts and techniques to better navigate 3D space. We'll talk about adjusting keyframes in the graph editor. I'll show you how to animate multiple layers all together using one series of strokes within the keyframe editor or the graph editor. And then we'll be creating and editing some templates for Premiere Pro. And then of course, we're going to end with some prizes and some resources that you might want to check out. So hold on to your seats. We've got a lot of stuff coming.
How does that sound, everybody? Good?
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool.
All right. You want to hop into the next one?
Yes, we're going to go into the next slide here.
For this and drop.
Sure.
Drop
So everyone sees my screen okay? And how I try to think about it is in terms of there's a very similar kind of workflow between Premiere and After Effects using some tricks. So in Premiere Pro, there's a source monitor where most people will first load their footage, right? They'll make an edit decision, they'll bring it into a sequence. That sequence is reflected in a program monitor. After Effects has a similar thing. So just notice here in my project panel, which I'll make a little bit bigger by pressing the tilde key, if I double click a clip, what this does is it actually loads it into a layers panel, or you can see here, footage. And if I just treated this like regular footage, I could come into After Effects and essentially make an editing decision. The shortcut keys are a bit different. So I'm going to press Option left square bracket for in point and Option right square bracket for out point. Now if I took this footage window and I docked it over here to the side and had it next to my composition window, we're kind of seeing that similar layout between After Effects and Premiere Pro. And it gets a little better in this footage panel, and that is that there are some similar edits that you can use. So there's a ripple insert edit, as well as an overlay edit that you can place inside of a new composition once you choose your clip. So this is one thing that just sort of helped me get over a little bit of the huge water of After Effects and how I looked at the composition window. So I'm going to hop back over to Ian, and he's going to do a little bit of a description of how he sees After Effects.
Yeah, so like many of you, I'm guessing, let me do a quick survey. How many of you were primarily designers, came from the print world, and then hopped into After Effects and that sort of stuff? Yeah, quite a lot of you, right? So one of the things that I actually love about After Effects is the fact that it is, in my mind, Photoshop over time. So right now I'm showing you an After Effects project where I have Illustrator layers that I've brought into the project and laid out within After Effects. But when I first got started, when I actually started creating projects, I didn't start inside After Effects. I started inside of Photoshop. and I would create funky icons and different graphics and things like that, and then I would create those layouts inside of Photoshop. And you notice here in Photoshop, I have folders that contain different elements, and then I have my eyeball here on the left that turns the visibility off and on. And when I actually go ahead and double click in the project panel of Photoshop and choose that Photoshop document, I can import it as a composition retaining layer sizes. And when I click open, it's going to allow me to leave the layer styles editable if I had any styles applied, but I could click OK, and now I have a composition. And if I double click that comp, you notice that it's been brought in, and all of those folders are now pre-compositions inside of my After Effects project. So the way that I view After Effects is Photoshop over time. I just think when you're thinking of the interface, it's good to kind of harken back to something that you're familiar with in order to actually build familiarity within the other application. So just like with the layers panel, having groups of elements in here and the eyeball on the left, I have the eyeball on the left, and if I double click on a pre-composition, I can see the different elements that actually make up that layer. So when I think of Photoshop, or when I think of After Effects, I think of it as Photoshop over time, or even Illustrator over time.
Very cool.
Yeah, man.
So I think we should talk about a little bit about project organization, some fundamental tips. So I know you had some to show.
Yep,
and then I have a resource that I'd like to give everyone, which shows some professional workflows of how people organize their files on their desktop and also generate a bunch of folders inside of After Effects. I have two resources for you. But Ian's going to start with some great housekeeping tips inside of After Effects.
Fundamentals and housekeeping. So how many of you have ever taken over a project from another designer and it's been extraordinarily well organized? Yeah, okay. That's kind of what I thought, right? Well, honestly, what I encourage most of my friends, designers, clients to do is actually create a folder structure outside of After Effects that is your house folder structure. It's a structure that is fundamental to your specific place. So if you have freelancers that come in or somebody needs to pick up your project, it actually makes sense. And the reason I do this on the Finder level or within the operating system is because After Effects references those files. It's not embedding those files like a Photoshop document. It's actually referencing those files. So what ends up happening is if I have a project and things are strewn all over the place, and then somebody just copies the After Effects file, it's going to have a whole bunch of missing elements. Or if some of the video files are in one folder and some of the other video files are in another folder, that's problematic. So what I encourage everyone to do is do something like this. If you have a project and you have a ton of different elements, like I have here, which are just Photoshop documents, JPEG files, Illustrator files, a video file, I suggest creating a folder structure. So what I'm going to do is create an empty folder structure here on the desktop as my template. And I'll save that in a method to where you can send it to any designers before they ever come to your facility, and they know how things are going to be organized. So to start, I go ahead and just create a new folder, and I'll just call it project. And usually when I do this, I'll number my folders based on how busy I am. So if I'm in a busy facility that cranks through projects, I'll name it 01 project whatever, and I'll start the numbers like every month. So January has 1 through 120 projects. February has 1 through whatever. Notice I don't put the date in here. The reason I don't put the date in here, every operating system has the ability to search files by date. So I don't want to be that redundant. But organizing them according to number actually does a really good thing, because a lot of us remember when we're busy, oh yeah, the end of September was killing me because I was getting everything ready for Adobe Max, right? So when I look at my projects and I go, I think it was in September I was really, really busy, I can go to the higher numbers because I know it was towards the end of the month when everything was rocking out. Does that make sense? Okay, so my 01 project, I would not name it project, I would name it whatever the actual client is or the project. So if it was for Adobe, I would say Adobe, and then I might put a dash Max or what have you, right? But this is my generic structure, so I'm gonna leave it set up like this. Then I'll do a straight up folder structure based on file kind. So I'll do 01 for PSDs, and then I'll go ahead and do another one for Illustrator files, AI. I'll do another one for still images. And I call it stills because a lot of times it's JPEGs, it's PNGs, it's whatever. They're flat still elements, right? And then the fourth one is the one where I'll go ahead and say After Effects. And I know everybody that's in here knows After Effects is number one, but how After Effects works, it imports everything in. So most of the time, like I said earlier, I'll start in Illustrator or Photoshop and do my designs and then bring those into After Effects. And then if you have a workflow where you're interfacing with other video editing applications, like, I don't know, Premiere Pro, I'd go ahead and put 05 underscore PRPRO, okay? Now, this is my base structure. Sometimes I will add an additional folder for like client files. If clients send you references, I'll do something like new folder and I'll say 06 client ref, okay? It's important to say client reference because I don't know whether those images have been cleared to use in the project. So anybody knows if they're working on this project, anything that's in the client reference folder isn't necessarily something that you're gonna be delivering or working with. But it also gives you a good track because your clients, as they're working through things, could turn around and say, I sent you that on whatever date. And if you go in the folder, it's gonna be sitting in the folder. Does that make sense to everyone? All right, now, once you have this structure set up for the unorganized projects, it's a simple method of just copy and pasting each of the different elements into the folder. And noticing here, I have a footage folder that's missing. And the reason it's missing out of here is I work in a system with shared storage. And 9 times out of 10, my video files are shared on shared storage. Those of you that work in larger facilities might have a similar situation. So for the shared storage, I usually actually have a folder structure just for the video files that are shared through everything else that I'm working on. But if you're working remotely or on systems like this, like a laptop, you want to go ahead and add a footage folder. So I'll go ahead and just add 07 for any footage. So that's video footage, DSLR, iPhone, high-end cameras, uncompressed, red, whatever, okay? So once this is set up, what I'll do is I'll right-click and I'll go ahead and compress the project folder so it is now a zip file. And that will forever live as a zip file with empty folders. So anytime any of my new freelancers come into the facility and they start a new project, all they do is double click on the zip file and it automatically creates another folder where they can go ahead and change the folder structure. Does that make sense to everyone? All right.
So I have a resource for everyone as it comes to organization that you might want to check out. And I'll email everyone after who is signed up for the session, so you'll have this as a resource, so you don't need to take a note. A site out there is called Justin McClure /GYST. And what this is they've interviewed a bunch of art directors, post-production professionals, VFX artists in different lines of work, and they allow you to download their folder structure. So I don't want to get too much into the folders anymore, but you can see here on my desktop, I have downloaded some professional workflow structures here of how people work with After Effects. You can see here a 4-folder structure with many subfolders. Again, this is free to download from that site, and this resource is contained in a keynote that we'll email anyone who signed up for the session. Now, the site gets a little bit better when it comes to organization, and that is some of the people that they interviewed actually gave a free After Effects script. And the script generates the folders that you actually see here in my project panel. So I just want to show you how it works. Once you've gone inside your After Effects preferences and given permission to write scripts, you can install a script in a specific folder, which the documentation contained from this site will give you, and you can run a various script. The script that I'm going to run is the main GYST script, which is called the folder generator. And I have a folder structure here. It's just going to duplicate it right now, but I want to show you how easy it is. You can walk into an After Effects project with this script and get a bunch of folders generated for you right away. So while this might not be the one that you want, this is one form of organization that organization uses, there are a few others that you can download from that site. Now, in terms of another way to look at this, where you might receive an After Effects project and you have no idea what the other person's done inside of it. You look at the project panel, it's extremely messy. Video files are all over the place.
That never happens.
And someone's decided to literally label every single composition untitled 1 through 10. So this is a nightmare for you to get a hold of. And there is a third-party script. It's a paid-for script, and one element that I thought was awesome. This script is called Motion 2, and it does a lot more besides what I'm talking about. But one thing it does is it identifies clips, images based on metadata, and will put them in folders for you. It is one of the best scripts I've seen online for basically taking a messy project and giving you some form of organization. Again, I'm going to include this link for you into the resources if you've signed up for this session. So don't rest assured you'll have that Motion 2 Mount MoGraph way of generating and starting off with an organization level. So enough about organization. I'm going to hop into a few color correction tips, some features in terms of the Lumatree effect, but I'm also going to talk just about a cool thing that you can do with curves in After Effects. How many of you have used curves in another application, whether it be Photoshop or Illustrator? So you've got the same thing in your effects and presets in After Effects. In my effects and presets tab, I'll come over here and just do a search for curves. I can see that under my color correction category. I'll drag that on a clip inside my composition. I've already added it once today to make sure it works, so let me get rid of the duplicate. And just show you that you've got a couple curves to choose from: RGB, your red, green, and blue, and your alpha. If you use your Command 1 key, that's going to go to the red channel. Command 2 is going to go to the green. Command 3 and Command 4. So just a quick way of being able to easily select curves, which is a really nice trick, especially if you're coming from Photoshop or Illustrator. Coming into here, I'll make a brief curve adjustment here on the red channel, just in terms of closer to the shadow area, and also to my highlights. And what I'd like to do is try a few different types of blending tricks with this layer that I've already duplicated in my composition. I could go here, making the timeline large for a second with my tilde key, and of course, navigate through all of these various blend modes, or I can use a handy 2 sets of shortcuts. So if I select the clip on top and I press Shift equals, you can see that it's actually cycling through the blend modes in my composition panel. It's moving forward between each of the various blend modes. Right now I'm on linear burn, and if I press Shift minus, that's going to move back. Handy little feature in Photoshop already, but something that you can bring into After Effects as well and use to cycle between various blend modes and speed up your workflow. There's a new addition in terms of color correction that actually comes from Premiere Pro, and it's the Lumatree effect. And this is just a great overall effect inside of After Effects as well that has a ton of color correction options no matter which application you come from. And I wanted to just show some of those new features on this clip here in front of me. I'm going to do a search for Lumatree in my Effects and Presets tab and apply it to this clip. If you're new to the Lumatree effect inside of After Effects, one thing I would suggest is you could go to the Creative section. There's a bunch of various sections in here, some for basic correction for those of you that use Lightroom, Creative, curve adjustments, color wheels if you come from video, and even secondary based corrections. Looking at the Creative section, I kind of think about this as a way to apply looks, and there are a ton. These mostly come from Premiere Pro, but are embedded here as well, where we can choose a bunch of color looks and try to see what that looks like on our footage. we can actually load our own lookup tables, and we can play around with the intensity. But just a great way to come up with different color looks from your project that are already built into the application. Now, what's new on this feature happens to be under the Curves tab. I'm just going to close down this section here where it says RGB curve and focus on these hue and saturation curves that are available. And this is basically a way for me to either select a pixel in my composition, and based on that pixel's hue or saturation, I can make some sort of selection and do almost some secondary color correction, meaning I'm affecting only part of the pixels in the image. If I go here to the hue and saturation selector, I'm going to select the eyedropper and just sample a color out of this lady's blouse. You can see here that selection's been made, and 3 dots have been made on the hue versus saturation graph. What I can do is now boost this hue's saturation, or alternatively, do a cool look where I can select everything else outside of the selection. So if I drag down these 2 dots on the opposite end, you'll notice that only what remains is that blue color, and everything else has been desaturated in the image. Now I'm going to add to this with the next hue versus hue selector. So going through the process, this time I'm selecting a hue based on a pixel. So I'll select the eyedropper again, make a selection here. We can see here that we have a similar selection where we've got 3 dots on a graph, but this time I actually want to use this to change the color of her shirt. So I will drag up. You'll see there that you get a little line based on which color you can switch it to. And I've changed the color here of her shirt. Now, there's a slight problem, and if you pay attention to the window on the right-hand side, you'll see that there was a blue tint coming from the outside color, and it's also becoming affected. The great part about any effect in After Effects is you can combine them with masks. And I'm going to basically make a mask around that section, say to ignore the window, and make sure that you're only affecting the dress. Thanks, this is a static shot, but we could also combine it with tracking. I want to select my pen tool, and this is a shape tool unless a clip is selected. And once a clip is selected, you can come in here, make a mask around a specific portion of the image. And what I'm going to do now is get this Lumatree color effect to reference that mask. This has to be done in the composition window. I'm going to double click the Lumatree effect inside Effect Controls, and you'll notice that that's a cool tip to get your Lumatree effect down here in the timeline. If I make this window a little bit bigger by pressing the tilde key, one thing you'll see is there's a series of compositing options under the Lumatree color effect. And if I click on the plus icon, it's now referencing mask number 1 on this layer. Now I don't quite have what I want. In fact, what I'd like to do is actually come here inside my color work effect, and here where you see mask is just invert it. So I want everything outside the mask to be affected, not what's inside the mask. So there was just a little bit of a newer tool that we wanted to cover in terms of using a Lumatree effect and how you can do some secondary base corrections really easily and fluently, and then also combine After Effects masks to get the selection that you're looking for. Was that pretty cool, guys? Okay. Ian.
All right.
I think you got some cool tips to show.
Yeah, man.
I'm going to hop you.
I'm
going to hop you over.
Up. All right. Excellent. So one of my favorite tips happened to overlap with one of our favorite experts' tips. So School of Motion, Joey Corman, he sent in his tip. We went out and asked a bunch of different designers that we really enjoy. And Joey's definitely one of them. And he's a great instructor as well, like I said, with School of Motion. And one of his tips was sequencing layers. And that's one of my favorite tips as well. So I'm going to show you a couple different techniques that we can use to sequence multiple layers. And as I do that, I'm also going to drop in some keyframing techniques and maybe the graph editor or some other stuff. I don't know. We'll see how it actually goes. Does that sound good? All right, sweet. So now what I'm going to do is go ahead and double click on the start composition that I have here in my project. And you notice I have a bunch of Illustrator layers that are layered on top of this background. Now, I want to sequence these layers to appear from right to left, okay? So what I'll do is I'll click on this bottom layer, which is my right layer here, and I'll just drag it over to the right. And as I drag, I'm going to hold Shift so it snaps along the x-axis. And then I'm going to go up here to my top layer, which is my plane layer. And I know you can't see that it's a plane, but since it's selected in the timeline, when I click and drag and hold down Shift, now it's going to be selected so I can drag it over here on the left-hand side, okay? So I want to distribute these so they're actually placed across the middle of the scene. So to do that, I'll select layers 1 through layer 6 by clicking and shift clicking. And I'm going to use a panel that a lot of people discount when they're inside of After Effects. And it's the Align panel. And you might see Nick use this a little bit later as well. This is one of my favorite panels also. In the Align panel, I can distribute layers. And I chose the top and bottom layers and position those accordingly. So now when I go ahead and distribute these layers based on their midpoints, now they're going to be perfectly spaced and distributed across the middle of the composition. Cool? All right. How many of you use the Align panel? A couple of you? A lot of you. Awesome. You guys are amazing. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and close this now. And what we'll do is actually create multiple frames of keyframes or keyframes on multiple layers using one set of techniques by selecting all of the layers. So right now, I want all of these elements to appear in these positions. So we're going to animate backwards, okay? If you're new to animation, this is a technique you might use a lot. If you have something positioned where you want it to resolve, set that keyframe first and then move back to the beginning. So what I'm going to do is move my current time indicator to about 1 second in the timeline, and then I'll select all these layers. And on the Mac, I can press Option P. On Windows, it's Shift Alt P. So P shows you the parameter. Option P opens the parameter and sets a keyframe, okay? That works for all the keyboard shortcuts. P for position, S for scale, R for rotation. You get the idea, okay? So now I'm going to go back to frame 0, and I'll deselect all these layers, and I'm just going to select my plane layer, and I'll move that over here, and I'll hold down Shift as I start to drag it to make sure it stays on its axis, okay? So now that's positioned over here, and I like that position, and I want all of these other elements to use that exact position. So since that keyframe's selected, or I could go ahead and just draw a lasso around that keyframe, I can copy it and then select all the other layers underneath and paste, okay? So now if I press the spacebar in preview, you can see everything fans out, okay? And it's moving in a linear fashion. So I'm gonna do a couple things. The first thing I wanna do is go ahead and make sure that I adjust my keyframes so they're not linear, okay? Because that's kind of boring. So to do that, I'm gonna go ahead and drag a lasso around all the keyframes, okay? So with all the keyframes selected, I'm going to press F9 on my computer, which is the same thing as going up under animation and going to the keyframe assistant and choosing Easy Ease, okay? So that applies an ease on both sides of those keyframes. So now if I press the space bar, you can see everything comes in and slides in an easy fashion, okay? But ease is a nice little way to move things, but if you guys have been paying attention to anything in the industry, I'm sure you've noticed that people like much more drastic speed changes, wouldn't you say?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Yep.
So the way to do that is to use the graph editor. And if you've never used the graph editor before, don't be scared, all right? Follow along with me. I'm going to go ahead and make sure all of the keyframes are selected by drawing a lasso around all of them. And then I'm going to go ahead and click the graph editor button here to pop it open in the graph editor. Now, Sometimes when you open the graph editor, it will look like this. And other times when you open the graph editor, it will look like this. Either way, it's sometimes an intimidating look when people first open it up, right? But what's cool about this is the fact that I have all these keyframes selected. I can make one adjustment to handlebars and it will adjust all of the keyframes that I have selected. So what I'm going to do is change the magnification of my timeline by clicking this little blue tab over here so I can zoom into my timeline. Then this second button, I want to make sure that I'm in this speed graph, like so. And I'm going to click and drag a lasso around these two anchor points here, which is going to give me control handles. So what I want to see happen is have these elements slide in quickly and then slow down gradually. So to do that, I'll just grab this one handle and click and drag to the left. And this is giving me a beautiful visual representation as to the speed of these elements when they move into the scene. So now if I pop out of the graph editor, move back to the beginning of the timeline, deselect all the layers, press the space bar, you can see they've slid in and they've slowed down, all from using the graph editor. Was that bad? Was that okay? Was that scary? All right, cool, all right. So now what we're going to do is sequence the layers, because doing all this all at once is fine, but if I want them to actually slide in sequence, I'll use the sequence layers command, which is actually one of the oldest commands in After Effects, but it is, in my opinion, one of the single most useful commands. Yes. Bar none. Oh, sure. So the way I like to work with this is to actually set a duration for the layer based on how I want the offset to function. So for example, if I want these to sequence in and have a new one appear in the scene every 15 frames, I'm going to move my current time indicator to 15 frames in the timeline. And then I'm going to use one of my favorite keyboard commands after I select all the layers. So I'll click on the right layer, shift click on the top layer, and I'm going to press Option right bracket, okay? On Windows, it's Alt right bracket. That will trim the layer to the current time indicator. Not slide, but trim, okay? So now all these layers are nice and short. And this is the most important thing to pay attention to with sequence layers. The order in which you select the layers will determine how the sequence functions. So if I click on the right layer and then shift click on the plane layer and go up under animation, go to my keyframe assistant and choose sequence layers, I can go ahead and click OK, and it's going to sequence based on the first layer that I selected through the last layer that I selected. Is that cool? All right. So check this out, right? I got all excited when I first saw this. I was like, sequence layers, that's great. Let me go ahead and preview this. And no, that's not it, right? It's close, but not quite. So what we need to do is press the space bar and go ahead and move the current time indicator to the end of the timeline. And the easiest way to move to the end is to use the end key. So when you press end, it moves to the end of the timeline. And with all these layers selected, I can repeat the same command I used to trim the layers by pressing Option right bracket, and that will trim the layers all the way to the end of the composition. So now when I press the space bar, everything is going in sequence. We've created something dynamic, and we've done this in a matter of minutes, even with all my explanation. Does anybody think that's cool?
Cool.
All right.
Sweet.
Yeah. So now that we've gone through some of that stuff, are you going to jump into some of Eran's tips?
Yes. So we got some tips from both Eran Stern, who's doing some sessions here on After Effects. Some of you might have taken his boot camp, and Jomi Corman from School of Motion. So again, when I send you the keynote, these tips that we're covering just a few of them. We have a document of 3 from Eran Stern and 3 from Joey for you to have that breaks down these tips in a lot more detail. So for Eran's tips, I'm in here in my composition, and you might have noticed that someone who was in this room got really mad and sort of tilted over the plant. So this is just where my plant itself, if I press S for scale and then go Shift R for rotation, if you take a look at the values, they've been set from their origins, right? One is 130% in scale, the other is 45 degrees in terms of rotation. There's a few handy tricks by double-clicking various tools in the toolbar to reset these back to square one. So one of those is with the plant layer selected, if I go to the default selection tool and I command double click, control double click on a PC, it resets the value to 100%. If I do the same thing with the rotate tool, or the rotate tool, however you want to pronounce it, because you select it with a W, command double click, the rotation is set. So those are some tips for you to basically reset your settings. And there's a cool one here where you have what I'm going to call an array. An array is where you have multiple values for a given parameter, i.e., in this instance, because this layer is 3D, shape has an array of 3 values, and you can see there that there's also a lock icon to make sure that we don't make any errors to the scaling of the layer. For instance, if you drag on your layer in the composition panel, sometimes it can get tricky and you can make a change here and skew your layer. There's a handy function. If you option double click that lock, I'll just show it again. 130 the skew, but if you option double click this area where it was locked, resets the values all to 100%. So just some double clicking tricks in terms of getting around your interface. How many of you guys have done some text in After Effects, come back the next time and really wish that After Effects' character panel was set to square one? Anyone?
Any of you?
So if I come up here, I've got some really ugly text that a designer before me created. It is line spacing's all off, and they've chosen my least favorite font. I think this is Comic Sans.
It's my favorite.
So you
What are
guys can give me
about?
a ticket if you have that, in the bag. Did you guys see those tickets? Please give me one a little bit later. But I'm going to come up here and just show you something here in the character panel. So in the character panel, in a lot of panels, I like to call these flyaway menus, because if I didn't tell you it was there, you probably wouldn't know. And it flies away from the eye. But you see these 3 lines, and at the very bottom, you'll see you can reset the entire panel back to its original. So that will work a lot better if I select the text, come over here, and reset the character panel. Okay? That same value is also available in the paragraph panel, so you can reset those back to their default values at any time you choose. One more thing from Aaron Stern that I wanted to cover, and that has to do with lights. So you can add lights when you make a layer 3D, and then that light will interact with your layer when it is 3D. Now, how many of you guys have used adjustment layers in another program? There are some things called adjustment lights. So the idea is I've just moved down my spotlight. So it's under these 2 values here, under the wall in the background. And you'll see here, this is your kind of adjustment layer category. And right now, this light is affecting quite a bit of the room. I don't know why everything's going black, but if I actually change it into an adjustment layer light, now it's affecting only the 2 layers underneath, the wall and the background. This is just another way to limit what your light is affecting. There's a ton of other parameters under layers where you can choose for 3D layers not to actually interact with lights, but just a really cool trick that Aaron has shared with you in a document, again, that we'll send. So let me just make this and turn it back to its original. And I wanted to show you guys a couple of really handy shape tricks, because there's so much with shape layers in After Effects, it's really good just to know some shortcut keys to get shapes really quickly and efficiently. Number 1 here, you can cycle between all the shapes in your toolbar by pressing the Q key. So the Q key is going to cycle between every single shape once I select it. Now I have the rectangle tool here, and notice what happens when I double click. A rectangle is the composition size matching exactly what's in the composition that was open. Just a great way if you're wanting a background through a shape layer. I'm going to undo that and actually use the Q key to cycle a bit further to the star tool. I'm going to make sure that nothing is selected here in my project. We can see here its fill is actually red. And if I start to drag, 2 of the keys that I like to use to make sure this is going to be constrained from the center are the Shift key and the Option key, which makes sure that that shape is looking great. This is actually going to the default values of the previous shape. But what I'd like to do on the fly is add or take away points from my star. So if I use the downward arrow key, notice I'm taking away points from the star. Now the biggest thing here, my hand is still on my mouse. I haven't released my mouse. You release it, these shortcut keys aren't available. So the downward arrow, taking away points, the upward arrow, adding points. To add to this, if you use your left and right arrows, these affect two values within the shape layer, referred to as inner and outer roundness. And you can take a star and come up with an extremely different looking shape. I'm using the right arrow right now and kind of bloating that star shape, a pattern on the fly without even having to go inside the shape layer and adjust these values or parameters. A lot easier to do. So there's some shape layer tricks. I've got one more, which actually has to do with Photoshop. So in Photoshop, I have a blank project here that's set for video quality 1920 by 1080. And there's this one tool. The tool is called the Custom Shape tool. It's under the menu just above it, the hand tool. And it gives you basically options for a bunch of custom shapes. The custom shapes that are available happen to be at the top of the menu. What shows to you at first is a few shapes, but if you head to the gear icon, you can change this list to all. If I choose OK, you've got a lot more shapes available. So I'll select something fairly simple here. To go with that background, I'm going to select this cat guy. And I'm going to drag out and hold down Shift and Option to make sure that that is constrained. Now the cool part is I can take this layer and copy it as a shape layer into After Effects. The way to do it is just above the Custom Shape tool is a way to get to the Direct Selection tool. With this tool, notice all the points selected in the cat. Now that that is selected, I'm going to press the handy shortcut to copy, Command C. I'm going to go into After Effects. And inside of After Effects, I will come here and select this layer. Actually, no, I won't select any layer. Minus that. I'll select the pen tool. And I'll click and make a point. So you can see the shape layer there at the top of my composition panel called Shape Layer 1. If I press Command V, based on the properties of this, the fill is the shape that's been given to you. And now you can replicate this pattern. You can animate it using all After Effects properties. This and the gateway to the Creative Cloud is just a collection of content screaming to you to add to shapes and use the power of shapes in After Effects, including extruding these objects and making them into logo animations. So I wanted to give you guys a couple of shape tips. What do you guys think? Pretty cool? Okay. While a lot of you in the pre-survey didn't answer that you're working with green screens, I'm standing for a second because I've been sitting all day during sessions, so don't mind me. I want to refer to something that I like to call blind keying, which most people partake in. Blind keying is the option of you add a keying effect to key out the green, and all you do is you pick a pixel and you hope for the best that it will remove most of the green in your screen. You have no idea what's going to happen after you move to something called matte view. Right? Matte view is going to show you a black and white image of what you want to keep and what you want to remove. White being what you want to keep. In this case, it happens to be my subject. So for some simple setups of green screen tips in After Effects, you could avoid something called blind keying with a little bit of a setup. So follow me here as I take the layer in my composition and I double click it. So this layer is opened inside the layer panel. I can see here clearly by this film strip. And I'm going to do a side-by-side comparison with this in terms of my composition window on the left and the layer panel on the right. In fact, I do this so often that under the window menu, I've actually saved a workspace layout called green screen, which sets this up automatically. It's gone to another comp here by accident, but let me select that. So the cool thing about this panel is I'm going to do a search in effects and presets for key light. And if you ever do this for a green screen, there's going to be two things that show up. The actual key light effects and this, which is a preset. I suggest that you use the preset, as it's a way better way to key and gives you 3 effects to make the process a lot smoother. So adding this preset, you can see here in my effect controls, I've got my key light effect, I've got an additional effect called a key cleaner, and I've got this additional effect that handles spill. A spill is when you start to key out green, you're going to get its opposite color, which happens to be magenta in a color wheel. And in order to make or neutralize that magenta, you want to get rid of that spill. So it just adds this cool preset that I suggest you use in terms of keying. Now, the cool part about this is inside my layer panel, it's referencing the spill suppressor effect, the last one here. But I'm going to click off this button, which is called render. And under my key light effect, I'm going to change the view to something called status. So I told you what we're seeing here, white represents what you want to keep, black represents what you want to remove from the image. And we want to remove pretty much the entire green background. If you select your eyedropper here in Screen Color and hover over to the layer window, I'm going to hold down the Option key, and I get a sense now for what pixel is best to start with. You can see there I'm getting some better values over here. But if you spend some time holding down that Alt button in connection also with the eyedropper, we can start off with a fairly decent key and then refine those properties under the screen color or matte. So anyone who wants this, I'll also send you just a link to this link in terms of the split window, but just a great way to start keying or getting a reference for what you're choosing in terms of pixel.
Oh, yeah.
And not performing blind keying where you have no idea what that pixel is going to do. Pretty cool? Awesome.
Do you want to talk about the other two in the preset?
I talked about the green screen preset, but I have the camera thing.
Okay, cool.
And then I handed them. So
All right.
I wanted to talk about cameras for a second. And there was a little bit of feedback in terms of like, how can I work with cameras in After Effects a bit better? How many of you guys use cameras in After Effects right now? Okay. A lot of times I'll find myself trying to sculpt movements between various text layers, maybe various illustrations and Photoshop, and I'll really want to have a good idea or a grasp for constructing movement, or at least a way of constructing movement a little bit easier. So let me hop to a composition I have here called camera framing, and my timeline's getting really busy, so I'm going to right click, and I love this option, which is just to close all other timeline panels so that I can remain sane for a couple more minutes. Okay. So I've got in this composition a camera, and I've got 2 text layers. Text compositions. One of these text compositions happens to be off screen in Z space, not seen by the camera. What I'm going to do to show it to you is review a camera view. So there's a way of seeing or keeping sane in 3D space by bringing up various camera framing views. So here on my left is a top view, and on my right is the active camera view. And just to show you, my camera is here, and the title camera is right over here. I've got another layer way back, kind of again in space, which I want to fly to as easily as possible. So some of you might have used something called the Unified Camera tool. And this tool allows you to basically change the window layouts of your orthographic views or your perspective views, which basically adds orientation in your 3D space. But in your top view here, I'm just going to zoom out of the scene and just show you further out here, we should see a second camera scene. Not seeing, it starts a little bit later, but you can see it right there. So here's my first layer, and here's my second layer. And I want the camera to fly from here to here as easily as possible without trying to manually move it in terms of position. So a cool little tool here that most people use in orthographic views happens to be the frame tool. What this allows me to do is select a camera and select a layer, and if I press in this top view, the F key, notice how everything is framed to the view of the window. Just to do it again, I'll select the camera and my one title camera layer and press F again, and it frames this sort of flat text animation and my camera. So I actually use this in active camera views. And I want you to see that my camera also already has a bit of animation to it in terms of its position to move around the first text layer. And around this point where my two layers overlap, so my first title group and my second, I want to fly to the second camera group. What I'm going to do is select this second camera text group and my camera and look right here in the timeline where my point of interest and position is. With the active camera view selected, and again, my camera and the camera scene, if I press the, there we go, active camera view, I have my unified camera tool selected and I press F. I don't know if you just saw there, but because I've already started the keyframing process, it framed up that second group for me already. And I don't have to manually drag to find it. It just flew to it for me.
Did y'all see that?
Did you guys all see that?
Unified camera tool. It's really kind of a cool thing because if you design something and you position it in a random place, a lot of people's pain points is navigating the camera around the scene. And if you use that technique, you can just, with one button, have the camera automatically move to your graphics and frame it.
Yes, and then you don't have to actually manually drag the camera to find that group. So the trick of this is you have to be in the unified camera tool. So in the unified camera tool, that's where the frame tool works. If you have it selected, any of the tools that are under by pressing C, you can then frame your camera and a group in the active camera group or another group and stay a little bit saner in 3D space. Pretty cool? Awesome. So I think you have a couple things, Ian?
Yeah.
Okay,
So let's go ahead and hop in there.
over to you. Perfect.
All right. So here's an exciting lower third graphic element. How many of you have ever had to create lower thirds in your entire life? Yes, exactly. So one of the big reasons why we create lower thirds in After Effects is because it has excellent animation tools. But another reason to create graphics inside of After Effects is the fact that you can create templates for Premiere Pro. So what I'm going to take you through is a couple little keyboard shortcuts that I use to manage shape layers, but then I'm also going to show you how to prepare files to save it as a template so then Nick can open up inside of Premiere Pro and show us how to actually work with those templates in Premiere Pro. Because I don't know about you, but when I do a design, I like to go ahead and create the animation for the lower third and then give it to the editor and say, have fun, and they can make 85 other different versions of it. But pre-template time, I was the person that was creating 85 different compositions and going in and changing each individual name. That doesn't sound like any fun, does it? All right, so check this out. I have a lower third animation that's actually come up here, and it's not quite finished, so we're gonna finish it first, and then we'll prep it. So the first thing I wanna draw your attention to are these shape layers that were animated. So I want you to notice if I select both layers and then press the U key, you will see any of the animated properties. I'm sure you guys have experienced that before, right? You see the keyframes, okay? Now, if I want to see what's been changed with this shape layer so I can make an adjustment to choose a different color, I could press UU and it will reveal any of the parameters for that shape layer that have been changed. So right here, the color was a setting that was changed. So now I can go ahead and just click in here, and instead of having it be that dark green, I could have it be something like this yellow-brown, okay? Does anybody think that's cool? UU? That's one of my favorite things for shape layers, because shape layers are one of these things that if I collapse the shape layer and open it up, you'll notice I have my contents. In my contents, I have my rectangle. Inside my rectangle, I have my path. I have my stroke. It's much easier to select a layer and just press UU, and then I can get right at the key elements that I've been working with, okay? Now, another pain point that I've heard people talk about is when they work with shape layers, right? Here, I can press UU. You'll notice that I've animated the transform position for rectangle 1, right? And part of the reason I did that was when this rectangle was created, it has its own set of transform properties. But if I collapse the layer and I open the layer has its own set of transform properties, right? So if I go ahead and rotate here on this shape layer, it's going to rotate around the center of this specific rectangle, right? But sometimes you add a shape layer into a project and you want to be able to just go ahead and manipulate that shape layer using the keyboard shortcut for rotation. So I'll say R rather than drilling down into the shape layer. Well, if I say R, that's going to open the rotation of the layer and look at where the anchor point is on that shape layer. Is that frustrating? A little bit, right? So if I want to fix that, there's a keyboard command, which is Command Option Home. So with the shape layer selected, I can press Command Option Home, and that will reset the anchor point to the center of the shape layer. Now, this shape layer only had one element on it, so it's right in the middle of that shape layer. As we all know, shape layers can have multiple shapes. So if you use that, it'll put the center point in the middle of multiple shapes. But since I only had one, now when I go ahead and do the rotation, it's set in the middle of the shape layer. Is that cool? All right. So now what I'm going to do, I'll just keep begging for applause, so that's fine. All right. So now I'll go ahead and undo that last thing here, and let's go ahead and do some basic animation. As you guys know, there is animation, or there are animation presets inside of After Effects for text elements. If you're new, you may not necessarily be familiar with that. So what I'm going to do is actually fade up letter by letter just by going in the effects and presets, and I'll choose fade up. And I have options like fade up by characters or fade up by words. So what I'm going to do is fade up characters on this text layer. And notice I drag and dropped it directly on the text in the composition panel. Boom. Now, I want to fade up. Yeah, it's fun. Now, hold on. Not done yet. All right. So now I want to fade up by, which one did I last do? Let's see. Was it characters? Yes, it was characters. Now I want to fade up by words. So what I'll do is I'll select layer 2, and I'll press I to move to the end point of that layer. And I'll go ahead and fade up by words. Now, when I pressed I to move the current time indicator to the end point of that layer, when I drag and drop this directly on that text layer, I can drop it in the comp panel or here in the timeline. When I let go and then press the U key after selecting layer 2, I'll press the U key, you can see the keyframes were added right at the current time indicator. Okay, so if I need to retime this, I can go ahead and click on a keyframe and just drag it like so. But the first layer here, if I press U, notice my current time indicator wasn't at the start of the layer. So what I'll do is just drag a lasso around those two keyframes, or just click the word start, so those will be selected. And I'll click on one and I'll hold shift, and as I drag it, it'll go ahead and snap to the start of that layer. Now I can deselect those keyframes and slide it to the left like so. And now to time this, I'll go ahead and just slide my subtitle over to the right, and I can go ahead and preview this. And now you can see we have our text fade in, and we have everything all set up, right? Cool? All right, good stuff. So now we're ready to actually prepare this for a template to send over to Premiere Pro. So what I'm gonna go ahead and do is go up under the window menu, and in the window panel, I will look for the Essential Graphics panel, okay? The Essential Graphics panel is the panel that allows you to determine what parameters can be changed inside of Premiere Pro, okay? So what I'll do is I'll make sure I have the 0, 1 lower third composition selected, and then I'll go over here in the master dropdown and I'll choose 0, 1 lower third. And now I'm getting a preview as to what that's going to look like. And I'll click Solo Supported Properties, and it's going to show me any of the properties that I can make editable for my editor. So for example, if my editor doesn't want this dark yellow color and I want to give them the ability to change that color, I can just drag it and drop it up here, and I can label that change. I'll call it subtitle color, or color with an R. All right, there we go, okay? I can do the same thing with the text itself. When I scroll through, I can look for the individual text elements. Here we go. And to do that, I'll drag the source text up here. So for the source text, I'll say title text. Okay? And I can go through this process for anything that I would like to become editable in the editing environment. And as you can see, there are a number of different things that I could make editable inside of Premiere Pro when I'm preparing this template, okay? So let's say these are the only two things I want them to be able to change. They can't change the actual text of the subtitle, but they can change the title for the lower third, and they can change that color. So what I need to do is click Export Motion Graphics Template, and it's going to tell me I need to save my project. Do I want to save it? And I'll click Yes. So now it's going to go ahead and ask me where I want to save this templates file. What I want to do is, if I'm working on this local system, save it to a local templates folder. But if you're working in a work group and you have your Creative Cloud rocking and rolling, you can click on the drop down and you can save it to a library and then share that file out of your library with other people in the work group, and they will have access to those templates. Now, to save you the pain of having to wait for this to actually roll through and have Nick upload, I upload, he downloads. Nick actually has a template already loaded, so he's going to go ahead and customize a template for a slightly more complex graphic scene. Sound good? Yes. All right, here we go.
So magic just happened and this template completely changed. But this is actually one of the templates or motion graphic templates that are available on Adobe stock. You can purchase some of them for nominal free, and there actually happens to be a number of free Adobe stock templates as well. And inside of Premiere Pro, there are two styles of templates that you should know of. One are templates that are made inside of Premiere Pro, and the others are templates made from After Effects. The ones from After Effects are colored like this, okay? So this is a template which, if he saved that to his local system, would be available in the Essential Graphics panel under the Browse tab. And if I look here under the Browse tab, I can see all the actual templates that are here on my system. All I have to do is simply take this template and then drag it into a sequence. This Essential Graphics panel also has a secondary part to it, which is the Edit tab. And the Edit tab is where I can make all the changes. Another really good identifying feature of the difference between an After Effects and Premiere template, templates made in Premiere, you can actually change the text inside the project, the program monitor. I want to get into a screaming match with these guys. I feel like I should. Let's go.
Program monitor.
So that was way better. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. So you can see here the amount of parameters someone copied over to give to an editor. Some of these actually include switching backgrounds, where you can have multiple backgrounds and give them an option to switch it. Actually even switch some animation. Now, on leaving this note, this is a really render-intensive file, okay? And we're asking After Effects to do a ton here. I'm basically, through Premiere, through something called Dynamic Link, saying, hey, please look inside of After Effects and try as best as possible to play back in real time. And sometimes, depending on your system, it's not going to work really well. You're asking way too much. So I want to show you this one feature that you should know if you think that you're at a final stage in your template, close to a final stage, or even a final stage with an After Effects composition. And that happens to be this option here. It's called Render and Replace. I refer to it as baking a cake. What this does is it actually renders out your After Effects project as an MOV file or a format of your choice, an MXF, and will then link to it on your system.
But that's not the cool part.
That is not the cool part. The cool part, I actually did this ahead of time because I want to save you guys the process of actually rendering out this extensive extruded, beautiful template. You can see here that it's now referencing a movie file, and this is what it would look like. The color will change. The cool part is, even if you need to go back, you can always restore the unrendered version and still continue to work with it inside of Premiere Pro if you made an Essential Graphics template, or even better, press the shortcut Command-E to open up an After Effects composition and make some changes. So it's like looking at a file on your system and either pointing to your rendered version or your actual other version.
But it's linked.
Yeah, and you're saving yourself the time of waiting constantly for this to play back. You just take a little bit of time and make sure it's referencing the Premiere timeline. Pretty cool?
All right.
Okay.
Good job, man.
Thanks, man. We have a couple closing notes.
Yeah.
Let me just switch over here.
Surprise!
Our friends at Boris Effects, they make a few products, one most notably for After Effects, which is built in and available for you, is Mocha AE. And today it went over a major overhaul in the way that it works and functions inside of After Effects. Now, each one of you can get the professional version of Mocha Pro, which has even more features, and it's unwatermarked for 30 days. Or you can pick one of two major plugin packages, which is Continuum or Sapphire. So it's 30 days. The big note here is that you have to, in the next 30 days, download it, or it's no longer going to be available. So from today's date, you have 30 days in order to go here on this slide, which we'll also email to you, and then use this for 30 days unwatermarked. On top of this, you guys can do a quick look under the right side of your seat, not too far in, but we've left 5 business cards spread throughout the room. Whoever has a business card, 5 people, gets a 1-year free subscription to any one of these products. And that is courtesy of them. So whoever has the business card, it's going to be on the right-hand side, not too deep in. You've just got yourself a 1-year subscription to your choice of product. We just ask you to come up and introduce yourself so that we can start the correspondence with Boris. What did you guys think of the session? Cool.
All right.
So we have, I think, our contact information up here too. And don't forget, please let us know how we did with the session survey. Say again? We will send to everyone who signed up for the session our deck of what we've covered, the extra tips that I promised you, and then some additional details. And I believe that they're recording this presentation, so it might make its way on the Adobe site as well for you to reference. But we wanted to really thank you. Here's our contact information if you want to reach out. And we would really appreciate your feedback to hopefully keep coming back if you found it useful.
And if you have that business card, come on up and get your free 1 year. That's pretty amazing. These are high-end products. So please, I can't wait to meet you all. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much for allowing me to speak for you guys.
Have a great
Max.
Max.
Appreciate it.